The sound hits first. Not a gunshot, not an alarm. A whistle, sharp, flat, contemptuous, cut across the surface of the training pool like a blade skipping water. "Hey, you, the one with the dollar store fins?" 42 trainees turned in unison. At the far end of lane 7, a young woman in a faded navy blue swimsuit was adjusting her mask with quiet, unhurried hands. She didn't look up. She looked like she hadn't heard, or didn't care. Both options outraged Senior Chief Instructor Wade Hollister in equal measure. He was not a patient man on his best days. Inside the tactical dive facility at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, Virginia Beach, with 42 Phase 3 BUD/S candidates watching and a 5-hour evolution already on the clock, Wade Hollister had no best days. He had standards, a schedule, and zero tolerance for individuals who occupied space in his facility without having earned the right to breathe its recycled air. He crossed the pool deck in 8 heavy strides, boots loud on wet tile. He stopped 2 feet from the woman, folded his arms across a chest full of confidence and certifications. At 51, with 23 years building a reputation at this facility, Hollister had become the kind of man who makes junior instructors find reasons to be somewhere else when he's in a poor mood. He was, by most accounts, an exceptional teacher. He was also the kind of man who had decided long ago that exceptional teaching looked a great deal like systematic humiliation. "Who authorized a civilian in a restricted dive facility?" he said. She looked up then, eyes level, completely unreadable. Brown hair pulled back in a simple elastic, no makeup, no expression. She reached into the mesh bag beside the bench and produced a folded slip of paper. Administrative transfer order, stamped, initialed, with a chain of signatures going all the way up to the letterhead of Naval Special Warfare Command. She held it out without a word. Hollister took it, read it, made a face like it tasted bad. "Observation clearance." He dropped it back into her outstretched hand. "You know what that means? It means you sit on the bench. You watch. You don't touch the water. You don't touch the equipment. You don't breathe unless I say so." He paused, letting the formation hear every syllable. "Are we clear?" She nodded once. Someone in the back of the trainee formation actually laughed. She tucked the paper back into her bag with 2 hands. Corners aligned to the fold lines, the motion precise and practiced, the way someone handles a document they've already memorized, then moved toward the observation bench without another word. She settled onto the end of it with the stillness of a person who has spent long hours being still in spaces where stillness was operationally necessary, placed the mesh bag at her feet, and opened a small notebook across her knee. At the far end of the facility, near the equipment door, Master Chief Patrick Donnelly stood with a clipboard he hadn't looked at in 10 minutes. He watched the young woman walk to the bench. He was 61, compact and gray, and weathered in the way of men who have spent decades doing things in bad weather in locations that don't appear on maps. He had come to this facility on what had been described to him, vaguely and from several levels above, as an inspection visit. He had not inspected anything yet. Something crossed his face. Not recognition, not yet. Just the particular stillness of a man whose instincts have started whispering something he cannot quite hear above the ambient noise of a busy training facility. He looked back down at the clipboard. In 20 minutes, every person in this building would understand exactly who they had just laughed at. Hollister turned back to his formation with the satisfied air of a man who has addressed a problem and resolved it. "Since we apparently have a guest today," he announced, loudly enough for the sound to bounce off the low concrete ceiling and back, "let's make sure we're all performing at our very best." The sarcasm was meant to land on the woman on the bench, and it did, but not in the way he intended. She was already watching the facility clock on the far wall, pen held loosely in her right hand, writing without looking at the page. Phase 3, warm-up evolution, lane assignments as posted, 2 minutes to get in the water. 42 bodies moved with the organized urgency of young men who have learned that slowness costs. They peeled off in pairs toward assigned lanes, shaking out arms, checking masks, running through the gear checks that BUD/S had drilled into them until the motions had become reflex. The humid air carried chlorine and the particular tension of young people being systematically evaluated. The woman on the bench wrote down the time, 0814. Lieutenant Brock Sutton, first in his lane and first in most things, tall and blond and acutely aware of where the eyes in any room were pointing, peeled off his t-shirt with the practiced ease of someone who had spent considerable time in front of mirrors. He was 26, the informal leader of the alpha group within the class, the kind of trainee that Hollister quietly favored because he performed loudly and looked the part. He had moved through every room he had ever entered, with the comfortable authority of someone for whom physical superiority had always been its own argument. As he passed the observation bench on his way to lane 2, he slowed. Not much, just enough. "So, what's your major?" he said, pitched to Carrie. "Administrative studies, or are you more the accounting type?" The two men flanking him laughed. Sutton didn't. He delivered it with the casual precision of someone who had been making comments like this his whole life, sharp enough to land, mild enough to disavow, and kept walking toward his lane. The woman on the bench did not look up from her notebook. Her pen did not stop moving. Her hand did not tighten around it. What she did, which almost no one noticed, was track Sutton's reflection in the pool surface from the corner of her eye until he entered the water. Then she shifted that attention to the next pair of trainees entering lane 4, then the pair after them. Her eyes moved across the pool like a second clock. Petty Officer, Second Class. Rita Colson was managing equipment at the north end when Hollister stopped beside her. Colson was 24, quiet, competent in the way that doesn't get promoted as fast as loud competence, but keeps everything running. "Get the observer something useful," he said. "Give her the timing board." Colson looked at the bench, then at Hollister. "The timing board assignment usually—" "She's observing, isn't she? Let her observe the clock." He moved on without waiting. Colson walked to the bench with a large whiteboard on a claw mount, a dry erase marker, and the quiet, apologetic expression of someone delivering a task beneath the dignity of any adult. "I'm sorry about this," she said, low enough that Hollister couldn't catch it. "I don't actually know what you're here for, but I can tell it isn't this." The woman accepted the board from Colson's hands. She set it on the deck between her feet, angled toward the nearest lane. She adjusted the claw mount with 3 deliberate measured clicks until the viewing angle was exactly correct. Colson hesitated, then walked back to her station. She would think about those 3 clicks for the rest of the morning. The warm-up evolution ran for 22 minutes. The woman on the bench held the timing board and watched. She wrote in her notebook between intervals, holding the pen with 2 fingers and a thumb, the grip of someone for whom extended writing was never the primary use of their hands. Petty Officer First Class. Thomas Guerrero arrived at 0836 with a dive equipment inspection kit and the expression of a man who considered this particular assignment beneath his demonstrated skills. Guerrero was 38, built with the functional density of someone whose mass had always served a purpose, and he had been a dive instructor at this facility for 6 years. He knew more about underwater mechanics than most people in the building, and he was acutely conscious of this at all times. He walked past the bench on his way to the equipment room. He glanced at the woman, then he stopped. "Hey," he said, "Civvy, you know what the PSI on that center rack tank reads right now?" The kind of question designed to produce a blank look, followed by an explanation about gauge mechanics. She looked at the tank rack he was gesturing toward. She looked at the gauge from approximately 8 feet away. Not close enough for standard vision to read comfortably, not at that angle. Then she said, without hesitation, 3040. Guerrero blinked. He walked to the rack and checked the gauge himself. 3050. A 10-unit variance within standard gauge tolerance at that distance and viewing angle. He looked at the gauge for a moment, then picked up his kit and walked into the equipment room without saying anything else. Hollister called the formation for a between-evolution brief. The trainees gathered at the pool's edge, catching their breath in ways they were trying to make look effortless. Hollister paced in front of them, with his hands locked behind his back. "I noticed technique deficiencies in the flutter kick pattern this morning, particularly lanes 3 and 5, corrective drill at 1300 hours." The woman on the bench was writing. Hollister turned to look at her directly. "Miss Reeves." The name came out with a particular flatness that turned it into something smaller than a name. "What exactly are you writing?" "Notes, Senior Chief." "Notes on what?" "Observations, Senior Chief." "I didn't ask you to make observations. I asked you to hold the timing board." "Yes, Senior Chief." A pause. "What did you write about lanes 3 and 5? A half-second calculation. "Lane 3, position 4 has a hip rotation issue breaking his streamline at the kick recovery phase. Lane 5, position 2 is rushing the glide. He's kicking before full extension, losing approximately 30% of his propulsion efficiency. Silence. The kind that doesn't quite know where to land. Hollister walked to the bench. He took the notebook from her hand without asking. Looked at the page, looked at the next page, looked at the first page again. The notes were not the notes of someone watching a drill for the first time. Not the notes of someone who learned to swim at a community pool and received an administrative paperwork assignment. They were structured observations with timing data, pattern identification, and lane-by-lane technical breakdowns written in a shorthand that was familiar only to people who had spent time inside formalized training documentation environments. He handed the notebook back. His expression had recalibrated, not into respect, not yet, but into a different quality of attention, the kind a predator gives a thing it cannot yet classify. "You'll hold the timing board and nothing else," he said. "Clear?" "Yes, Senior Chief." He walked back to the formation. Rita Colson, from her station at the north end, had watched the entire exchange. She watched the way the woman set the notebook back on her knee with the same unhurried hands she'd used to accept the timing board. She watched the way the woman's posture never shifted. Not when Hollister approached, not when the notebook was taken, not at any point in the morning. Colson had been in the Navy for 3 years. She had never seen a civilian sit the way this woman sat. If you've made it this far, if you can feel that something is off, that the quiet one on the bench is not who she's supposed to be, hit subscribe right now. We put out stories like this every single week, underestimated people, impossible moments, and the truth hiding just beneath the surface. Hit subscribe and don't miss what comes next. The second evolution began at 0900, and Ensign Kirk Palmer materialized beside the bench with the particular energy of someone who had identified an opportunity. He was 23, ambitious in the way that hadn't yet learned the difference between initiative and interference, and he held Hollister's favor the way young men hold the favor of powerful older men, as a position to be leveraged rather than a responsibility to be honored. "You're the observer from admin, right?" he said. She looked at him, nodded once. "Briefing package for today's evolution." He set a laminated sheet on the bench beside her. "Hollister said you'd need to reference it." "Thank you," she said. He smiled and walked away. What he did not explain, and what she did not initially notice, was that in setting the laminated sheet down, he had tipped a small amount of water from the bottom of his water bottle across the back 2 pages of her notebook entries. The shorthand dissolved immediately into blue-gray wash, the lane records and timing data from the past hour bleeding into an illegible smear. Palmer was 20 feet away before she turned the notebook over and saw it. She looked at the damage for exactly 2 seconds, flipped to a dry page, picked up the pen, and when Hollister, 3 minutes later, called for the morning's compilation data, the timing numbers, the lane-by-lane records, the cumulative summary that would require the damaged notebook to reconstruct, she recited every figure from memory, lane by lane, trainee by trainee, without referring to anything. Every number was correct. Hollister checked 3 of them against his own records. Then he looked at her. Then he looked at Palmer, who was finding the middle distance very interesting. Calder Hess, 22, the youngest trainee in the class, standing at the formation's end nearest the bench, had been watching since the pressure gauge answer. He was the type of person who notices things that don't fit and files them quietly, which is a quality that either takes you very far in the Navy or gets you in trouble, and sometimes does both simultaneously. He looked at the woman's left arm, where the sleeve of her swimsuit cover had ridden slightly above the elbow. He studied the texture of the skin, the particular pattern of callus on the inside of her palm, across the fingers, into the heel of the hand. He had seen that specific callus before, on his brother, after Hell Week Phase 3. He looked away, filed it. The third evolution involved underwater equipment work, and PO1 Guerrero ran it with the systematic precision of a man who considers correctness a personal matter. He moved through the lane assignments methodically, checking regulator connections, testing secondary air sources, flagging equipment issues. When he reached the equipment staged for the woman at the bench, which Hollister had pulled from the general stock with the announcement that the observer might as well get wet since she's here and taking up oxygen, he stopped. The O-ring seal on the primary regulator's first stage was incorrectly seated, not a manufacturing defect, not wear damage. It had been pressed into the wrong groove with deliberate care, the kind of care that requires knowing exactly what you're doing and intending to do it. The seal would hold at the surface. It would fail at depth. Guerrero stared at it. He looked down the pool deck at the back of Palmer's head. Then he looked at the woman on the bench. He walked over. "Regulator's got a problem," he said flatly. She set down the timing board and looked at the regulator he held. She turned it once in her hands. Her fingers found the first stage without searching. She pressed her thumb against the O-ring housing, tested the position, and without hesitation said, "Wrong groove. First stage failure under pressure. The seal holds at the surface and blows at depth." She looked up at him. "Repair kit in storage locker 4. You want the 40mm O-ring, not the 42. Guerrero did not move for a full 4 seconds. Then he walked to storage locker 4. He did not ask how she knew what locker to name. He pulled the repair kit and brought it back to the bench without a word. She performed the repair in 1 minute and 52 seconds. She reseated the O-ring, tested the housing pressure manually with a contact check technique that Guerrero recognized from the Special Operations Dive Manual. Not the recreational edition, not the standard military edition, the other one, and handed the regulator back. Guerrero held it, looked at her hands, looked at the repair. He walked back to his station and set the regulator on the table. He stood there with both palms flat on the surface, not touching anything else, staring at the far wall. At the far end of the facility, Master Chief Donnelly had put his clipboard down on the equipment rack. He was standing with his arms at his sides, watching the pool deck with the complete stillness of a man who has made a decision and is now waiting for the right moment to act on it. The underwater swim drill began at 10:45 a.m. Hollister stood at the deep end of the pool with a stopwatch and the expression of a man who has been waiting for this moment. "Lane assignments," he announced. "All personnel." He let a pause settle, "including our observer." He turned, found her on the bench, addressed her with the particular satisfaction of someone presenting a gift wrapped in a trap. "Miss Reeves, since you've been so useful with the timing board, it only seems fair that we see what you can actually do in the water. 50 meters, underwater." He paused again for the room to appreciate it. "If you can't complete the swim, I need to know about it now, before we have a safety incident." The trainees said nothing. Some of them were too disciplined to react visibly. Some of them were not quite that disciplined. She set the timing board against the bench. She stood. She removed the cover shirt. The formation went about 1.5 degrees quieter. What the cover shirt had been concealing was not the soft edge frame that went with the faded swimsuit and the administrative transfer order and the dollar store fins. What stood at the bench in the navy blue competition suit was compact and angular and mapped with the particular topography of someone who had spent years doing physically demanding things in unforgiving environments. Not the gym-built symmetry of a trainee, but the functional asymmetry of an operator, where everything that exists serves a purpose and nothing has been added for appearance. On her left forearm, running from the inside of the elbow toward the crest of the wrist, there was a scar. Not the scar of surgery or casual accident. The shape and orientation of it, the way it tracked the grain of the arm, the particular quality of the healed tissue, belonged to something specific. In this room, at this moment, only one person had the context to understand exactly what specific thing. Donnelly, at the far end of the pool, had gone completely still. She picked up the fins, which were not, on inspection, dollar store anything. They were a split fin design, preferred by cave divers and combat swimmers for their efficiency at working depth. A detail that would have been apparent to anyone in this room who was paying the right kind of attention. Hollister checked his watch. "The class record," he said, for the benefit of everyone listening, "is 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Something to aspire to." She looked at the water, adjusted her mask with one hand, testing the seal at 3 specific points in a sequence that Guerrero, now watching from across the pool deck, recognized as the pre-dive protocol from the Special Operations Dive Manual, not the recreational manual, not the standard military edition. She entered the water. She did not jump. She did not slide. She executed a controlled surface entry with the economy of someone who has entered water in operational conditions where noise and splash carry tactical consequences, and she went under before the surface had fully settled. The pool clock ran. "Lane 7, timer on," Hollister said. 1 minute. The trainees in adjacent lanes were completing their swims, surfacing, clearing masks. Sutton came up at 1 minute, 58 seconds in lane 2, his best time of the week, and barely had time to process that before he glanced at lane 7 and saw nothing. No surface disturbance, no bubble trail. The lane sat undisturbed under the facility lighting, as if no one had entered it at all. At 2 minutes and 12 seconds, which was the class record, someone at the shallow end said quietly, "Is she still down there?" Hollister looked at his stopwatch, looked at the lane. His jaw tightened exactly 1/fraction of 1 degree. At 2 minutes and 44 seconds, Calder-Hess stopped pretending to check his equipment and stood at the edge of his lane watching lane 7 with open, focused attention that he made no further effort to conceal. At 3 minutes and 10 seconds, the surface of lane 7 moved. Dana Reeves came up without a sound, not gasping, not coughing. The air she exhaled was controlled and measured, the long, deliberate release of someone who has spent significant time learning to use oxygen the way a precision instrument uses its energy, in calculated doses, nothing wasted. She pushed her mask to her forehead with one hand and looked at the facility clock on the far wall. On that wall, mounted in a standard black frame, the official facility record read 1 minute and 51 seconds. She had just beaten it by 4 seconds. Nobody said anything. The silence lasted the length of a full breath before Hollister clicked his stopwatch off. He looked at the readout. He looked at the woman in lane 7. "Equipment advantage," he said. "Non-standard fins." Guerrero turned around from the equipment station with an expression he was making a visible effort not to verbalize. "I used P.O. Guerrero's equipment," she said from the water. Her voice was level, unhurried. "He offered it earlier this morning. Same fins as class standard." Hollister looked at Guerrero. Guerrero said nothing, which was, in the arithmetic of this particular moment, its own kind of answer. You just watched her finish that swim. The class record, the facility record, without a single visible strain, without looking at Hollister once on the way up. Something is building in this room, and you can feel it. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, right now is a very good time. Commander Charles Vance arrived at 11:14 a.m. through the facility's main entrance, flanked by an aide moving with the purposeful urgency of someone who has been keeping up with a superior officer for years and has gotten good at it. Vance was 47, the installation's commanding officer, a man whose career had been constructed on a combination of genuine competence and the political instinct to be seen in the right places at consequential times. His unannounced walkthrough of the dive facility at this hour was unusual. His expression when he scanned the pool deck and found the woman on the bench was more unusual still. "Halford," he said to his aide, not breaking his scan. "That individual. Who is she?" The aide typed, waited, looked at the screen. "Dana Reeves, sir. Administrative transfer order. Observer status issued by..." He stopped. "By who?" "The issuing authority is Naval Special Warfare Command, sir. But her personnel file in the base system..." Another pause, longer this time. "It's returning a restricted access flag. Clearance required to proceed." Vance studied the restricted flag notation on the tablet screen. He had been in this business long enough to know that restricted access flags came in different flavors, and the flavor this one was showing him did not belong to the category of routine administrative privacy. He crossed the pool deck. Hollister straightened. "Commander?" "At ease." Vance stopped in front of the bench. Dana Reeves looked up at him with the same level, unreadable expression she had been giving everyone since the first whistle. "I'd like to know who you are and what you're doing in my facility," he said, professionally, without hostility. The tone of a man who asks questions because he is responsible for the answers. "Dana Reeves, sir. Observation clearance. Issued by NSW Command." She produced the transfer order from her bag, still folded, still aligned, and held it out. Vance took it, read it. "NSW Command doesn't typically send observers to this facility." "I understand that, sir." "What are you here to observe?" A brief, deliberate pause. "I'm not able to answer that question in this context, sir." Vance looked at her for a long, measuring moment. Then he looked across the pool at Master Chief Donnelly, who had not moved from his position near the far wall, who was looking back at the commander with an expression that could have meant several things, and was very deliberately not settling on any of them. "Master Chief?" Vance called across the pool. You know this individual? Donnelly looked at the commander, then at the woman on the bench, then back at the commander. No, sir, he said, which was technically accurate. He did not know her. He knew of her. He knew what the O-ring repair technique meant. He knew what the flutter kick pattern below the bubble threshold meant. He knew what the entry form meant. He knew what the scar on her left forearm meant. He knew what the facility record meant. None of those things added up to a person who was at this pool to hold a timing board. But he said no, he did not know her, with the voice of a man being completely accurate on a technicality he had constructed with precision. Vance's aide appeared at his elbow. Sir, I escalated the access request to the next clearance tier. The system response is... He turned the tablet so the commander could see the screen. Clearance level. Classified. Contact issuing authority to proceed. Vance studied the screen. He was a man of considerable clearance, and what this screen was telling him was that his considerable clearance was insufficient to view the complete service record of the woman sitting on the observation bench in the faded swimsuit. He handed the transfer order back. We'll continue this conversation shortly, he said, and walked toward Hollister with the stride of a man who intends to have answers before this facility closes. What Hollister said to Vance, Vance said to his aide, and the aide said into a phone to someone at the other end of the base. All of that moved in parallel to the thing Hollister said to Palmer when he pulled him aside 3 minutes later. The regulator this morning, Hollister said, low, flat, not a question. Palmer's face moved through 3 different positions before landing on something attempting to resemble confusion. Equipment report, Hollister said. Full account before 1500 hours. He held Palmer's gaze for exactly 2 more seconds, then released it and walked back toward Vance. Palmer stood where he'd been left, looking at his hands, arriving slowly at the specific understanding that the choices he had made this morning were about to have a very particular weight. Across the pool, Sutton had abandoned all pretense of post-evolution gear maintenance and was watching the woman on the bench with an attention he would not, 24 hours earlier, have been capable of giving her. He had been running a calculation since the underwater swim, the calculation a person makes when they realize they have been measuring someone against the wrong scale entirely, when the framework they brought into the room is revealed as insufficient for the thing they are actually looking at. He walked to the bench. She was writing in the dry section of her notebook. He stopped in front of her and tried the approach he might have used with a senior officer he needed something from. Hey, earlier, the major thing? I wasn't... Your underwater kick pattern breaks down at approximately 40 meters, she said, without looking up. The glide phase is strong, but you're recovering the kick before full extension. You're losing roughly 20% of your efficiency in the second half of every swim. Sutton blinked. It will matter more at depth, she said, when you're carrying a full gear load at 30 feet. She looked up then, meeting his eyes with the directness of someone who has long since stopped making her assessments tentative to spare people's feelings. Not telling you how to train, just, it's there if you want it. Sutton stood with his mouth at an uncertain angle. Then he walked back to his lane without another word, and something in the set of his shoulders as he went was not the same as when he'd come. The facility settled into the tension of a room where everyone has noticed something, but no one has yet said the thing that makes it real. Hollister ran the post-swim debrief with the same volume and authority as always, but the air had changed. The way air changes in a room when a conversation turns in a direction that nobody planned. The trainees were quieter than the morning had made them. Guerrero had not left the equipment station, but had also not touched any equipment in 14 minutes. Vance was in the anteroom with the door open 3 inches, speaking into his radio at a register that was careful and deliberate. The woman on the bench was writing. Calder Hess came off the last drill and toweled off near the bench. He didn't look at her directly. He drank from his water bottle and said, to no one in particular, Hell Week Phase 3 leaves a specific callus on the Palmer surface. The rope work is different from Phase 1 and 2. The blisters heal with a different pattern. He said it to the pool deck, the way a person says a thing they have been holding for a while and need to put down somewhere. My brother graduated Class 398. I'd know that pattern anywhere. She finished the sentence she was writing. Capped the pen. Looked at Hess. Go back to your lane, trainee, she said. 4 ordinary words, the kind any supervising staff member might say. But the architecture behind them, the particular weight those words carried, the unconscious authority in the way they arrived, the relationship they established between speaker and listener without asking permission. That was not a civilian sentence. That belonged to someone who had given orders in operational environments and had them obeyed. Someone for whom the geometry of command was as natural and unremarkable as walking. Hess stepped back, looked at his feet, walked back to his lane with the careful steps of someone who has just had something confirmed that they were not entirely prepared for. Donnelly, at the far end of the pool, did not pick up his clipboard again. The confrontation arrived the way confrontations in environments like this usually do, not as a single, clearly defined event, but as the accumulation of smaller pressures reaching a combined weight that no one in the room could continue to ignore. Vance returned from the anteroom with his expression composed into the blankness of someone who has received information that is still settling. Hollister had been reading Vance's expression, and he read it correctly. The information was not what Vance expected, and the information suggested that the situation in the pool deck was more complicated than the situation appeared. Hollister made the decision that the moment required resolution on his terms before it resolved on someone else's. He walked to the bench. The pool deck was quiet, the evolution technically complete, trainees in wind-down phase, Guerrero at his station, Coulson at hers, Donnelly immovable at the far wall, Vance 3 steps behind Hollister's left shoulder. "Miss Reeves," Hollister said. He kept his voice even, professional, the management voice he used when controlling a situation before it controlled him. "I think we've reached the end of what this facility can offer for observation purposes today. I'll need you to finalize your notes and proceed to the administrative office." A pause that was not a question. "Now, please." He put his hand on her shoulder. It was a directing gesture, the kind used in facilities everywhere, on civilians, on junior personnel. A light pressure on the shoulder pointing someone toward the door. In any other context, with any other person, it would have been unremarkable. She turned. Not a spin. Not a defensive movement in any way that word is commonly understood. A shoulder drop and a weight shift, the kind of motion that is not combat and is also not nothing. The unconscious reflexive grammar of someone who has spent significant time in environments where a hand from an unexpected direction carries a categorically different meaning, where the body's first language is angles and geometry and the efficient redistribution of force. She stepped inside his reach, rotated her left shoulder toward her body's center line, and the fabric of her swimsuit, pulled taut across her forearm by the rotation, rode up along her left forearm. The tattoo was small, minimalist, centered on the inside of the left forearm at the 2/3 point between wrist and elbow, placed precisely where a sleeve's edge would fall in every uniform she had ever worn. The placement of someone who was never intended for it to be seen by the people around her, only by the specific people who need to see it. A Mako shark, mid-strike, head down, body arched in full propulsive compression, every line conveying forward momentum and absolute intent. The line work was fine, deliberate, precise, the style of someone who treats the body as a document rather than a canvas, who marks significant things in places reserved for the significant. The fabric settled. The tattoo was visible for approximately 5 seconds. 5 seconds was sufficient. Hollister had stopped, not because of the tattoo. He didn't recognize the tattoo, didn't have the context to recognize it. He stopped because of the movement. Because what he had done to a woman who did not belong here was attempt a physical direction, and what he had received in return was not resistance, not complaint, not civilian instinct or trained defensive posture, but something that lived at a level below conscious decision-making in the place where bodies keep their longest memories. Across the pool deck, Master Chief Patrick Donnelly set his clipboard on the equipment rack. He walked across the pool deck, not quickly, not slowly, with the particular cadence of a man who has made a decision and is moving toward it with the complete, unhurried certainty of someone who has made irreversible decisions before and knows exactly what that walk feels like. He stopped in front of Dana Reeves at a distance of 3 feet. He looked at her left forearm. The fabric had settled. The tattoo was hidden again. He did not need to see it a second time. 30 years in naval special warfare, 14 of those with SEAL Team 6. Operations in locations that still appear only in classified archives, with people whose names are still not spoken aloud in public contexts. In those years, in those rooms, in those briefings with additional access requirements just to sit at the table, he had seen that mark twice. on two individuals whose files he had been briefly, under strict compartmentalization, allowed to access. Both of those individuals were, as of the last accounting he had ever received, listed as presumed dead in operations he was not permitted to name. The Mako Shark, mid-strike, the insignia of a compartmented element of naval special warfare so tightly held that most senior officers in this building would not have recognized it if it had been shown to them in a photograph with a caption. Donnelly came to attention, not the loose attention of a courteous gesture, not the reflexive straightening of a junior service member in the presence of rank. The full formal military attention, spine vertical, shoulders set, chin level, weight distributed to the balls of his feet. Every postural element that 30 years of habit had made automatic now brought to bear with the deliberate intention of a man making a statement that he intends to be legible. He raised his right hand. He held the salute. "Mako," he said. One word. Her call sign, spoken in the voice of a man who had heard it only in briefing rooms that required additional security measures to enter. Spoken with the specific inflection of someone who understands precisely what that name belongs to, what it costs the person who carries it, and what it means to say it aloud in a room full of people who don't yet understand what they are looking at. The pool deck went silent. Not the silence of people choosing to be quiet. The silence of 43 people who have simultaneously experienced the floor shift under them and are processing, each at their own speed, what that means for everything that happened in this building over the past 3 hours. Hollister's hand, still in the space between them, still in the directing gesture, still belonging to a man who had believed himself the highest authority in this room until approximately 9 seconds ago, remained where it was, suspended in the air, unconnected to any functional decision about where it should go. Vance, 6 feet behind Hollister, took one step backward, not retreat, recalibration. His hand went to the radio at his belt. He did not key it. Guerrero was standing at his equipment table with both palms pressed flat against the surface, staring across the pool at the woman and the Master Chief, with the expression of a man recalculating from the ground up everything he thought he understood about the morning he had just spent. Sutton stood at the edge of lane 2 with his equipment bag in his hand and his mouth open. Something was moving across his face, the slow tectonic movement of a belief system that has just received information incompatible with its current configuration. Calder Hess stood very still at the end of the formation. On his face was the expression of a young man who has been told that the thing he suspected was too large to be true is, in fact, exactly as large as he suspected. He had known since the callus. He had known since she told him to go back to his lane. He looked at Coulson. Coulson looked back at him. Neither of them said a word. Palmer had come around the far end of the pool on his way back from the equipment room and was standing halfway to the pool deck with the specific still expression of a man who has just understood, with the clarity that arrives only when avoidance is no longer possible, exactly what the regulator decision means for his career, his record, and the next several months of his professional life. Dana Reeves looked at Master Chief Patrick Donnelly. She raised her right hand. She returned his salute, clean and precise, wrists straight, fingers together, eyes fixed on the middle distance above his shoulder, the salute of someone who has given and received this gesture in operational contexts where it carried the full institutional weight of acknowledgement between equals. She held it for 3 measured seconds. Then she dropped her hand. The pool filters ran. The overhead lighting held the surface of the water in an even, flat glow. 43 people stood in the arrangement that the morning had made of them, and not one element of that arrangement was the same as it had been at 0814. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Vance was the first to find words. He addressed them to Hollister, quietly and directly, in the tone of a man who has already processed the situation and is now managing its consequences. "Senior Chief, I'll need a full facility report on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. Equipment logs, assignment records, the complete morning's timeline." A pause. "Everything?" Hollister's jaw was doing something complicated. He managed, "Yes, sir." Vance looked at Dana. His expression had the quality of a man who is choosing his next words with unusual care. "I owe you an apology for the day, I imagine," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You didn't know, sir." "No," he said. "I didn't." He looked at the room. at Hollister's suspended expression, at Guerrero gripping his table, at Sutton standing at his lane with the quietly demolished look of someone whose model of the world is being rebuilt in real time. I'm beginning to understand that there were a number of things I didn't know. He paused again. Beginning with why NSW Command sent you here. There was a very brief, precise pause. I'm not able to answer that in this context either, sir, she said. Something crossed Vance's face that was unexpectedly very close to a suppressed smile. Briefing room, 0700 tomorrow. Yes, sir. He turned to his aide. Halford, clear my morning. Then he walked toward the anteroom, and he walked differently than he had walked into the facility. The walk of a man who came in for an inspection and is leaving with a problem he hadn't expected and a question he cannot stop asking himself. Donnelly was still standing in front of Dana Reeves. He lowered his hand. He looked at her with the quiet attentiveness of a man who has a great deal he could say and is taking precise inventory of what is appropriate to say here. You held it for 6 hours, he said. 6 hours is enough time to see what you need to see, she said. I'll want to hear what you saw. You'll be in the morning briefing, Master Chief. I will. He looked at her for one more moment. Then, it's good to know the program is still active. She held his gaze, said nothing. Which, in this room, at this moment, with everything that had just become legible in the air between them, was its own kind of answer. Calder Hess was still standing at the far edge of the formation, not quite able to make himself leave. Hollister had dismissed the trainees 90 seconds ago, and most of them had begun the slow, stunned motion toward the changing facilities, moving with a particular quality of people who need to be somewhere quiet to process something large. Hess was not moving. He was watching the pool deck with the expression of someone who has just witnessed something they will be telling people about for the rest of their lives, and who understands that no version of the telling will quite capture what the room actually felt like. He looked at the timing board still leaning against the bench, the dry erase numbers from the morning still on it. He looked at the facility record plaque on the far wall. He looked at the notebook in the woman's hand, still open, pen still capped loosely in her fingers. The morning's note still intact in the dry half that Palmer hadn't reached. He had been told, at various points in his life and training, that the people who were the most dangerous to underestimate were the ones who gave you the most reasons to do it. He had been told this in the abstract, as a lesson from other people's failures. He had understood it as a concept. He understood it now as a fact, a specific, observable, this morning fact. Rita Colson passed him on her way to secure the equipment. She looked at his face, looked at the bench, looked back at his face. I knew from the 3 clicks, she said quietly. When she adjusted the claw mount, Hess looked at her. The 3 clicks? Nobody adjusts a claw mount to the exact correct angle in 3 clicks unless they have adjusted a lot of equipment to exact correct angles. She collected the timing board. I just didn't know what it meant yet. She walked toward the storage room. Hess looked at the pool one more time. The flat lit surface, the empty lanes, the institutional quiet of a facility that would run the next evolution tomorrow at 0800, as if this morning had been an ordinary morning. It had not been an ordinary morning. He walked toward the changing facilities. At the bench, Dana Reeves capped the notebook. She placed it in her mesh bag. She picked up the cover shirt, shook it out once, pulled it over her head. She aligned the sleeves, picked up the bag. She stood. The facility looked the way it had at 0800 before the first whistle. The pool smooth, the equipment staged, the facility clock running its quiet loop, the overhead lights holding the water in that flat, even glow that made everything look simple and manageable and known. Nothing about this morning had been simple. Nothing after tomorrow would be the same as it had been before it. The anteroom off the main pool deck was 8 feet wide and smelled of chlorine and old paperwork. And Commander Charles Vance had been standing in it for 4 minutes when the door opened and Senior Chief Hollister came through it with the expression of a man who has spent those 4 minutes doing urgent internal accounting. Vance let him stand for a moment, let the silence do its work. Who authorized the regulator assignment this morning? He said finally. The regulator was pulled from General Stock, sir. Standard pre-evolution check. Standard pre-evolution check would have caught a misshated O-ring. Hollister said nothing. P.O. Guerrero caught it, Vance said, after the observer identified it, verbally, from the bench. He looked at Hollister with the particular stillness of a commanding officer who has already made several decisions, and is only informing you of them as a professional courtesy. The observer, who has a restricted access personnel file. The observer who just swam a facility record in non-competitive conditions without blinking. The observer that Master Chief Donnelly, who has been in this building since 0700 and has said approximately 8 words all morning, just offered a full formal salute. Hollister's jaw worked once. Ensign Palmer, Vance said. He put water on her notebook. It was not a question. I have not yet confirmed. Wade. Vance used the first name deliberately, not warmly. I have known you for 11 years. I know what you do, and I know what your people do when you look the other way. The equipment report Palmer submits this afternoon will either confirm it or it won't, and if it doesn't, the conversation we have next will be considerably worse than this one. He picked up the radio from his belt. Full facility report, 0800, everything. Hollister looked at the far wall, at the equipment rack, at his own hands. Yes, sir, he said. Dismissed. The door opened. Hollister moved through it. Vance looked at the wall of the anteroom for a long moment, at the framed photograph of the facility from 1987, at the mission statement mounted beneath it, at the faded seal emblem above that. He thought about a restricted access flag on a personnel file, about a salute from a man who had not saluted anyone casually in 30 years. He keyed the radio. Halford, get me the NSW command duty officer. The changing room was empty by the time Dana reached it. Most of the trainees had processed through quickly, with the urgent efficiency of people who need to be somewhere less charged. She showered and dressed in the unhurried way she did most things, methodically, without wasted motion, and stood at the small mirror to put her hair back. She looked at her own reflection for a moment. 6 hours was a long time to be invisible. Longer than some operations, shorter than others. The specific discipline required was not the discipline of endurance, she had endurance to spare, but the discipline of patience, which was a different quality entirely. Endurance was about continuing under force. Patience was about making yourself small enough that the situation told you the truth about itself. This morning had told her several truths. Some of them she had expected, some she had not. She picked up the mesh bag, walked out. In the main corridor outside the pool deck, Petty Officer Guerrero was waiting. He was not waiting in the way of someone who has a plan. He was waiting in the way of someone who has been standing in a hallway arguing with himself about whether to stay or leave, and has stayed, and is now required to follow through on the staying. P.O. Guerrero, she said. I owe you an explanation, he said. You don't. I questioned your gauge read. I was wrong, and I made a point of it. You were verifying. That's your job. He looked at her with the expression of a man receiving an absolution he doesn't feel he's earned and is having difficulty accepting it. The O-ring repair. The technique you used. I've only seen that in one document. He stopped. Then, you didn't have to repair it yourself. You could have flagged it and let standard protocol handle it. Standard protocol would have taken 12 minutes, she said. The drill was starting in 8. Guerrero looked at his hands, then back at her. I've been a dive instructor for 6 years, he said. I thought I'd seen every competence level this pool gets. A pause. I was wrong about that. She studied him for a moment. The particular quality of his attention, not the competitive attention of the morning, not the technical challenger measuring a threat, but something with more texture to it. The attention of someone genuinely revising their estimate of the world. Your instruction is good, she said. The methodology is sound. The technical standards you apply are correct. She held his gaze. What I'll be writing in my report reflects that. Something crossed his face. The observer is writing a performance report. Among other things, he held her gaze for another second, then nodded. Once, the way a person nods when they have received information that changes several things simultaneously and are taking the time to let it change them properly. Thank you, he said. She walked on. Calder Hess was in the equipment storage corridor, which was a location that had no operational reason to require his presence at this hour, and which he was occupying anyway. He straightened when she came around the corner. I'm not supposed to be here, he said. No, she agreed. I have a question. He paused. You don't have to answer it. She stopped, waited. BUD/S, Class 412. My brother said it wasn't possible. He said He stopped, reorganized. He said the standards weren't adjusted, that they couldn't have been, because the program wouldn't work any other way. Your brother was right, she said. Hess looked at her. He said no woman could do it at full standard. He was wrong about that. A silence. The specific silence of a young man whose model of possibility has just been updated. How many? He said. 3 completed full qualification. 1 additional reached Hell Week completion, but withdrew due to injury in SQT. She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without editorial, as information rather than performance. Those numbers may change. Are the others? He stopped again, started over. Are they doing what you're doing? Assessment work? That question is outside what I can answer for you, trainee. He nodded. Then, carefully, do you teach? I mean, beyond assessment. Do you ever? I've taught, she said. Would you? He stopped. The sentence had gotten somewhere he hadn't fully planned for, and he was doing the honest work of deciding whether to follow it. Would you be willing to look at my kick pattern? The thing you said about Sutton, the extension before recovery. I think I have the same problem. She looked at him for a moment, not the measuring look of assessment. She had already assessed him, but something different. The look of a person who has been in this building since 0800 being careful not to be seen, and is now choosing, very deliberately, to be seen by this specific individual in this specific way. Pool opens at 0530, she said. I'll be there at 0545. Hess's expression did the thing that very young men's expressions do when they have received something they were not sure they would receive. He managed to keep it mostly controlled. Yes, understood. 0545. She walked past him toward the main corridor. He stood in the equipment storage corridor for a moment after she was gone, looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has been told that the thing they have been training toward is, in fact, attainable, and who is processing exactly what that means for the next several years of their life. The afternoon drill ran at 1300 hours as scheduled. Hollister ran it. He ran it correctly. The vocal register was the same. The technical requirements were the same. The corrective feedback he gave on flutter kick form was precisely calibrated, specific, accurate, actionable. The feedback of someone who is genuinely good at teaching and has, for several hours, been allowing other things to interfere with that. The trainees swam harder, not because they were told to, because something had shifted in the architecture of the space, in the way authority moved through the room, in the relationship between what was required and what was possible. And they could feel it the way people feel changes in air pressure, as a physical thing before an intellectual one. Sutton led the afternoon timing by 4 seconds over his morning personal best. He did not announce this. He checked his time on the wall clock, noted it, and moved back to his lane for the next interval without comment. Guerrero ran equipment checks with the focused attention of someone who has redefined what thoroughness means. Coulson noticed and said nothing, and logged the afternoon numbers with the particular satisfaction of someone watching a room remember its own standards. Dana spent the afternoon in the small administrative office at the north end of the facility, where Hollister had originally intended her to file paperwork, and which she had claimed with quiet efficiency as a working space. She wrote, not the shorthand of the timing board notes, the full structured observation report, section by section, criterion by criterion, with the precision of someone who has been trained to make assessments that will matter. Master Chief Donnelly appeared in the doorway at 14:30. She did not look up. You can come in, Master Chief. He came in. He looked at the document on her desk, the sections completed, the sections still open. He looked at the section headers. He sat down in the chair across from her. You've been watching this facility for longer than today, he said. 6 weeks, she said. Documentation review, personnel file assessment, training log analysis. Today was the live observation. You could have come in uniform? I could have, she said. Then I would have seen a facility performing for assessment. Instead I saw, she looked up, what it actually is. Donnelly was quiet for a moment. He looked at the desk, the neat arrangement of her materials, the notebook open to the dry section with its morning entries, the facility record plaque on the wall above the window. Hollister is a good instructor, he said. What you saw this morning, that's not all he is. I know. The report will reflect the full picture, she said. Including this morning and including everything that preceded it. She held his gaze. I'm not here to end careers. I'm here to identify where the instruction is working and where it isn't. The instruction at this facility is largely working. One instructor's management of his own authority is not. Donnelly nodded, slowly. He'll need to know that distinction. He will. She paused. I'd like you in the room tomorrow when I tell him. A silence. Donnelly looked at her with an attention that was not assessment. He had finished his assessment sometime before noon. But the more complicated attention of someone who is taking the full measure of a person they will know, from this point, for the remainder of their career. I'll be there, he said. He stood, moved toward the door, stopped with one hand on the frame. The coin, he said. I've been carrying it for 17 years. I was told to give it to the right person when I found them. He reached into his jacket pocket and set it on the corner of her desk. I think I've found them. She looked at the coin. It was worn at the edges, the relief of the insignia softened by years of contact. SEAL Team 6, the old design, the dagger and anchor emblem of a unit whose activities were still largely held in compartments she herself did not have full access to. The kind of coin that passes between people who have done significant things together, as acknowledgement that the things were real and the people who did them are known. She picked it up, turned it once in her hand. Who carried this before you? She said. Man named Garrett, retired out in 2008. A pause. He told me to give it to the right person when I found them. He had it from someone before him. He looked at the coin in her hand. The name on the back is original. I've never had it changed. She turned the coin over. On the back, scratched in the flat space below the unit designation, a name had been engraved with the small, deliberate pressure of someone who does not have professional engraving tools, but intends the inscription to last. The letters were precise and slightly uneven, the letters of a person who has done this by hand. D. Reeves. The room was very quiet. She looked at the coin for a long moment, at the name, at the wear patterns on the edges. 17 years of being carried in a pocket, taken out and looked at, put back. At the insignia on the front, smooth with contact. Garrett, she said. Thomas Garrett. Donnelly looked at her. You know the name. My father mentioned him once. Her voice had not changed in register, but something behind it had changed. Something very small and very specific, the way a line on a monitor changes when a signal arrives. 1997, he said Garrett was the best swimmer he ever worked with. A silence that held both of them. Your father was in the teams, Donnelly said. Yes. 1997 is in the restricted file. Yes. She looked at the coin, then at him. He didn't talk about it, ever. A pause. I found the coin listed in his personal effects after he died. But there was no coin. His effects came back without it. Donnelly was very still. Garrett gave it to me in 2001, at a debrief I can't name in a building I can't identify. He didn't explain how he had it. He just said, he stopped. What did he say? Donnelly looked at the coin in her hand. Give it to Reeves when you find one who's earned it. I assumed he meant your father. I've been carrying it for 17 years waiting to understand what he meant. She turned the coin over again, back to the name. She stayed with it for a moment. The length of a person allowing a thing to be real before they put it away somewhere, it will be safe. Then she set it on the edge of the desk, in the corner, where she could see it while she worked. I'll need to make some calls, she said. I imagine you will. She looked at him. Thank you, Master Chief. He nodded, stepped back through the door, walked down the corridor with the measured pace of a man who has just given away something he has carried for a long time and finds, to his own surprise, that he feels lighter rather than diminished. Stay with us. We are not done yet. The consequence cascade is coming. Every single person in this building is about to find out what happens when you spend a morning mocking a frogman. And the open question Donnelly just left in that room. It's going to pull the story into territory none of them expected. Stay with us. At 1500 hours, Ensign Kirk Palmer submitted his equipment report. It was 12 pages. The 12th page contained a section that had not been requested in Hollister's original directive, and which Palmer had added because the specific weight of the morning, the locked facility record, the formal salute, the way Hollister had looked at him in the 20 seconds after saying equipment report, full account, had communicated something to him that was clearer and more legible than any explicit instruction. The section documented the O-ring incident in precise technical detail, the fault, the mechanism of introduction, the individual responsible. The individual was Palmer himself. He described the action, the timing, the awareness that the fault would produce a regulator failure at depth, and his decision to proceed anyway. He signed it. He submitted it. Then he sat in the junior officers' quarters and stared at the wall and understood, with the uncomfortable clarity of very young men who have made irrevocable decisions and are experiencing the full weight of them for the first time, that there are choices that define the subsequent shape of a person's character, and that the report he had just submitted was one of those choices. He was afraid. He was also, underneath the fear, something that would take him several more years to properly identify. He was relieved. Hollister found Donnelly in the equipment corridor at 16:45, which was 15 minutes before Donnelly had planned to leave the facility. It was the kind of timing that suggested Hollister had been standing somewhere nearby, deciding whether to do this for those 15 minutes. "Patrick," Hollister said. Donnelly looked at him. "I've been running instruction at this facility for 9 years, Hollister said. "I've run 214 training cycles through this pool. My class completion rates are among the highest in the program's history." He stopped. "I know what I am as an instructor." "Yes," Donnelly said. "This morning was also what you are," Donnelly said. He said it without judgment, without softening, the way a person says a thing that is true and does not benefit from decoration. "You're both, Wade. That's the honest picture." Hollister stood with that. "She's going to write both in the report," Donnelly said. "I was there when she said it. 9 years of solid instruction, and one morning that would have ended a career if the person you went after had been anyone with less control over the situation than she had." He looked at Hollister steadily. "Think about what that means. Not just about her, about the thing you almost did." Hollister's jaw worked. "I didn't know who she was." "That's the point," Donnelly said. "That is exactly the point." A long silence. "The report," Hollister said. "Palmer's report. I know about it. I'm going to support it." He said it quickly before the decision could change. "Whatever the process is, I'm going to support it. I looked away this morning. That's in there too." Donnelly studied him for a moment. "That's the right call. It's a bad call for my record. It's the right call for your character." Donnelly picked up his kit bag. "There's a difference. In my experience, the people who understand that difference end up being the better instructors." He paused at the corridor intersection. "You've got trainees who swam better this afternoon than they swam all week. Think about what did that." He walked out. Hollister stood in the equipment corridor for a long time after, in the quiet of a facility winding down at the end of its day. The pool filters ran their cycle. The overhead fluorescents hummed their single note. The facility record plaque was visible through the door at the end of the hall. 1 minute, 47 seconds. The new number in the space where the old number had been. He looked at it for a while. Then he walked to his office and started writing the facility report. At 17:20, Sutton knocked on the door of the small administrative office. Dana looked up from the report. He stood in the doorway with his gear bag on one shoulder, and the expression of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation and is now discovering, upon initiating it, that the rehearsed version is insufficient. He was 26 and had moved through every environment he had ever entered, with the comfortable assumption that his physical presence and natural authority were adequate equipment for any situation. They were not adequate equipment for this doorway. "I said something this morning," he said. "I remember. It was—" He stopped. "I was establishing position. That's what it was. I saw someone I didn't think belonged here, and I established position. I've been doing that my whole life, and until about 11 a.m. today, I thought it was something close to a skill." She looked at him. "You want me to tell you it's fine?" "No." He met her gaze. "I want to apologize correctly. Not for the social optics of it. For the actual thing I did." He shifted the gear bag. "You finished a 50-meter swim at 3 minutes 10 under pool conditions, and I was standing 6 feet away making a joke about your major. That's what I did." He paused. "I'm sorry." She held his gaze for a moment. The specific measured attentiveness of someone who is not performing forgiveness, but actually administering it. Going through the real steps, taking the actual inventory, arriving at the real conclusion. The kick extension issue I mentioned is real, she said. You have the physical capacity to close the gap on that facility record. Your streamline is excellent. The kick recovery is the only thing that's holding your overall time. He blinked. This was not the response he had prepared for. At full gear load, at operational depth, that efficiency loss compounds, she continued. By 30 meters, you're working significantly harder than you need to be. Over a mission duration, that matters. She held his gaze. I'm not telling you this because of this morning. I'm telling you because it's true, and you're going to be an operator, and the true things are the useful things. Sutton was quiet for a moment. Processing? How do you correct it? Slower kick cycle at the beginning of a set. Let the glide run out completely before the recovery phase. Your instinct is to maintain momentum by shortening the cycle, but you're actually losing more forward speed through the incomplete extension than you'd lose through the momentary pause. She paused. It takes about 2 weeks to override the instinct, and about 6 weeks to make the new pattern automatic. After that, it's faster. He held this information. Then, will that be in your report, the training recommendation? Yes. He looked at the floor, then up. Thank you, said without the register of someone performing gratitude. The flat, honest register of someone who actually means it. He walked away. She watched him go. The adjusted set of his shoulders, the slightly different weight distribution of someone who is already, without being fully aware of it, thinking about kick extension. She turned back to the report. Vance arrived in the administrative office at 1800 with a cup of coffee he had not prepared, and had not asked anyone else to prepare. He had simply found it in the duty officer's station and brought it because the person in this office had been working since 0800 and the coffee was there. He set it on the desk without comment. She looked at it, then at him. NSW Command Duty Officer, he said. I reached them at 14:30. He sat down in the chair Donnelly had occupied earlier. They confirmed your assignment parameters, facility performance assessment, classified scope. He paused. They also told me this is the 4th facility in the past 18 months. Yes, she said. And the others? One resulted in structural program recommendations that have since been implemented. One resulted in 2 instructor reassignments. One resulted in curriculum modification. She looked at him steadily. This one is still being assessed. Vance nodded slowly. He looked at the report on her desk. The section's complete, the section's still open. Hollister, he said. The Hollister is a technically excellent instructor who has developed a management style that is incompatible with the demographics this program will increasingly be serving, she said. He can be corrected. The correction requires specific direct feedback that he has not previously received from institutional channels because those channels have not prioritized the issue. She paused. He submitted an honest facility report this evening. He included his own conduct. Vance was quiet for a moment. That's not what I expected. It wasn't what I expected either, she said it plainly. It changes some things in the assessment. The Palmer matter. We'll need to go through standard disciplinary process, she said. Palmer submitted an honest equipment report. That's also not nothing. She looked at her notes. He's 23. The decision he made this morning was wrong. The decision he made this afternoon was right. Both of those things are part of who he is. The process should take both of them into account. Vance looked at her for a moment. At the quality of attention she was bringing to these judgments, not the attention of someone cataloging failures for a report that will justify a predetermined conclusion, but the attention of someone genuinely trying to see things accurately. It was, he was realizing, the rarest quality in an assessor. You could have ended this morning's situation earlier, he said. When I arrived, you could have said what you were here for. If I had, the information I was collecting would have become performance, she said. I needed to see what this facility is when it isn't performing for assessment. She paused. Now I know. He looked at the coin on the corner of her desk, at the worn edges, the old insignia. Master Chief Donnelly seemed affected this afternoon. I haven't seen him like that in the time I've known him. She looked at the coin for a moment. He gave me something that had been waiting for the right person for a long time, she said. He was right that the right person had finally arrived, that's all. Vance did not press it. He looked at the coffee. 0700 tomorrow. I'll be ready. He stood. For what it's worth, The facility is better than you found it this morning. I don't think that's a coincidence. She looked at the report in front of her. At the sections, at the morning's timeline laid out in the discipline of documentation. It's not a coincidence, she said, but it's also not because of me. The capacity to be better was already here. She paused. It just needed a reason to remember it was there. Vance looked at her for one more moment, then walked out. The facility was officially closed at 1900. The lights in the main pool area were reduced to maintenance level, a single overhead bar casting the water in a dim blue-gray glow that made the surface look like something from a different world. The pool deck was empty except for the equipment staged for tomorrow's 0600 evolution, the timing board stored against the north wall, and the facility record plaque showing 1 minute 47 seconds in the space where 1 minute 51 used to be. Dana walked back through the main pool area at 1915, carrying her bag, moving toward the exit. She stopped for a moment at the edge of the pool. She looked at the water. There was a particular quality to a training pool in the off hours, after the evolved were done, and before the next one had begun. The stillness of a space that was not empty but waiting, that held the morning's exhaustion and the afternoon's adjustment and the evening's recalibration in the undisturbed surface. Everything that had happened in it, still present in some form that wasn't visible but wasn't gone. She had stood at the edge of water like this a great many times in her life. In pools that looked like this, and bodies of water that looked nothing like this, and locations she could not name in operational contexts she could not describe. She had entered water in conditions that required everything she had, that asked for the full inventory of training and discipline, and the particular calm that is not the absence of fear, but the management of it, the way an operator uses fear as information rather than obstacle. She had been taught to swim by a man who had carried a coin with her name on it through operations she would never have full access to. She stood at the pool's edge and thought about that. Not with grief, not with the particular hollowness of things that cannot be undone, with something more complicated and more durable, the quality of feeling a person carries when they understand that the things that made them were not accidental, that the inheritance was intentional even when it was invisible. She picked up the coin from where she had transferred it to her jacket pocket. D. Reeves. She held it for a moment, then put it back. She walked out. 0545. The next morning, the pool lights were on and the water was still, and Calder Hess was standing at the edge of lane 4 with his equipment on, and the expression of someone who arrived at 0530 and has spent 15 minutes being early. She came in at 0543, which was 2 minutes before she had said she would be there, which told him something about what punctuality meant in the context of people who had operated under conditions where the difference between 2 minutes and 0 minutes was sometimes the whole calculation. Lane 4, she said. Full equipment? We'll run the first set at half speed. I want to see the kick pattern at reduced pace before we work on it at full. Yes, he said. Ready. Present. All the available attention brought to bear. One more thing, she said. She stopped and looked at him directly. You asked yesterday if I teach. The answer is yes, I do, when there's a reason to. She paused. What I said to you in the corridor about going back to your lane. The way I said it. He nodded. That's what command sounds like when it comes from somewhere real, she said. Not from rank, not from authority structure, from knowing things that are worth knowing and being willing to be accountable for them. She looked at him steadily. You heard the difference. That's why you're here at 0543. She paused. That capacity, to hear the difference, is worth more than the kick extension. Don't waste it. He stood with that for a moment, the way a person stands with a thing that is important and that they want to receive correctly, that they don't want to reduce by rushing past. Understood, he said. In the water, she said. He went in. The 0700 briefing was in Vance's conference room. 8 feet of polished table, 4 chairs, 1 window showing the facility's vehicle court in the early morning light. Vance at the head, Donnelly to his left, Hollister to his right, with the facility report in a folder in front of him. Dana, across from Hollister with the assessment report on her side of the table. She had been in rooms like this across 4 facilities in 18 months, and the rooms always had the same quality in the opening minutes. The charged stillness of people who are about to be told true things about themselves and their institutions, who know this is coming and do not know exactly what form it will take. She opened the report to the executive summary. The Little Creek Tactical Dive Facility has maintained a training record over the past 9 years that, by measurable outcome standards, places it in the top 15% of comparable naval special warfare training environments, she said. Class completion rates, technical proficiency on exit assessment, incident and injury frequency. These metrics are consistent and favorable. She paused. The instruction methodology that produces these outcomes is sound and, in several respects, exemplary. P.O. Guerrero's equipment mechanics curriculum is the strongest I have encountered across any facility in this review cycle. Guerrero was not in the room, but the acknowledgement would reach him. She had made sure of it. The facility's performance deficit, she continued, is concentrated in one area, which is the institutional management of authority relative to the changing demographic composition of the program it serves. She looked at the table, not at any one person, but at the space between them where the truth of what she was saying was going to have to land. This facility operates under an implicit hierarchy that reinforces performance for the benefit of individuals who match a specific historical model of what this program produces. That hierarchy is not reflected in official policy. It is not reflected in curriculum design. It lives in the behavioral patterns of instructor management, in the allocation of supervisory attention, in the distribution of corrective feedback, and in the social architecture of trainee peer groups. She paused. Yesterday morning made several of those patterns visible at compressed scale, she said. What I observed in one morning was a distillation of what my 6-week documentation review indicates is a sustained pattern. She looked at Hollister now, directly and without hostility. Senior Chief Hollister, your instruction is the foundation of what makes this facility's outcomes as strong as they are. The report reflects that in full. Hollister held her gaze. He was doing it without armor. The expensive, uncomfortable honesty of someone who has already, in the night hours, made an accounting. The behavioral patterns I observed yesterday that are not consistent with this program's future are also in the report, she said. Both will be in the final submission. What happens with the disciplinary elements of yesterday's morning is a command-level determination. My role is observation and recommendation, not adjudication. She looked at Vance. My recommendation is that Senior Chief Hollister remain in his position, with a structured performance review framework and direct supervisory engagement on the specific behavioral patterns identified. She paused. Removing him from instruction would lose the program the strongest technical curriculum designer currently operating at this level. That's not an outcome that serves the mission. The table was very quiet. Hollister put his hands flat on the surface. He looked at the folder in front of him. He looked at the report on her side of the table. He looked at Dana Reeves with the expression of a man who spent yesterday morning establishing the hierarchy of this room, who sits on benches, who holds timing boards, who holds authority, and who is now required to locate himself within a hierarchy that is significantly different from the one he arranged. I understand, he said. There are 3 specific recommendations in the report. I'd like to walk through them. Yes, he said. She turned to the first recommendation. Donnelly walked out of the briefing at 08:57 and found Rita Colson in the equipment corridor, running the pre-evolution check for the 900 drill. Briefing's done, she said. Done, he said. She ran her checklist, checked a regulator connection, checked the secondary. How'd Hollister take it? Better than I expected. He watched her work, the efficiency of it, the practice sequence. She recommended he stay. Colson looked up. She did? She said removing him would lose the program its best technical curriculum designer. Colson was quiet for a moment. She went back to the checklist. That's a more generous read than he earned yesterday morning. It's an accurate read, Donnelly said. Those aren't always the same thing. She knows the difference. Colson finished the check on the primary rack and moved to the secondary. Hess came in at 05:30 this morning, she said. I was doing equipment prep. He said she told him 05:45. She paused. He was here 15 minutes early. He'll be a good one, Donnelly said. He already is, Colson said. She moved to the next rack. She spent 40 minutes working his kick pattern. I wasn't supposed to be watching. I was in the side corridor. But I could hear her. She stopped, looked at the equipment in her hands. She teaches the way good instructors teach. Like the person learning is going to need this. Like the stakes are real. She paused. Not like she's performing instruction, like she's actually transferring something. Donnelly nodded. He looked at the pool through the side window. The morning light on the water, the lanes marked, the facility waiting for the day's first evolution. She's not going to be here much longer, he said. I know. Coulson finished the rack. She was never going to stay. She looked at him. But she was here yesterday, and the thing that happened yesterday, she stopped, finding words for it. The thing that happened yesterday is going to be in this facility for a long time. The way yesterday changed what people think is possible, that doesn't go away when she does. Donnelly looked at the pool. No, he said, it doesn't. At 10:00 hours, Dana was in the administrative office finishing the final section of the report when her phone rang. Secure line, no display name. She looked at it for a moment, picked up. Mako, the voice said. Controlled, familiar in the way of a voice she had heard only in specific access-restricted contexts. Here, she said. Little Creek assessment complete. Final report submitting this afternoon. Good. Package is ready. Address Alpha. 80 hours. A pause. Understood, she said. Questions? She looked at the coin on the corner of the desk, at the worn insignia, at the name engraved on the back, at the facility record plaque on the wall, the new number in the slot where the old number had been. One question, she said, unrelated to the assignment. A pause on the line, not impatience. The pause of someone who has learned that Mako's unrelated questions are rarely unrelated. Go ahead. The restricted section of my father's file, the 1997 operation. She kept her voice level and precise. There's a coin that was engraved with his name. It was listed in his effects but not returned. I have reason to believe it passed through at least 2 other operators' hands before arriving at my current location. She paused. I'd like to understand the full chain of custody. A longer pause. Then, that section requires an access request through the archive division. I can route it to your clearance tier. I'd appreciate that. It'll take 30 to 45 days. I understand. Anything else? She looked at the report on her desk, at the full morning's documentation laid out in the order of its occurrence, the first whistle, the bench, the timing board, the O-ring repair, the underwater swim, the callus, the salute, the single word spoken in a room full of people who didn't yet understand what they were looking at. No, she said. That's all. 80 hours, Mako. 80 hours. She put the phone down. She looked at the coin. She looked at the report. She picked up the pen, turned to the final section, wrote the last paragraph of the facility assessment with the same precise, unhurried hands she had used to adjust the claw mount at 0814 the previous morning. 3 deliberate clicks, each one exact, settling the angle to within a tolerance that most people in the room had not noticed, and that Rita Coulson had been thinking about ever since. She signed the report, set down the pen. She was in the main corridor at 11:45, bag on her shoulder, report submitted through secure channel, when she came around the corner and found Hollister standing by the equipment room door. He was not waiting with a plan. He had the look of someone who has been where they are for a while and is going to remain there regardless of outcome. I have something to say to you, he said. She stopped. What I did yesterday morning? He paused, recalibrated. What I let happen yesterday morning, including the thing I didn't do, which was call it out when I should have. He stopped again. He was working very hard at this. The work was visible. That's not separate from who I am as an instructor. You said both things would be in the report. I understand that. I want you to know that I understand it. He held her gaze. Not the way you understand something when you have no choice but to say you do. The way you understand something when it actually gets inside and changes something. She looked at him steadily. I've been running this pool for 9 years, he said. I've had standards. I've held to them. I thought that was enough. He paused. It's not enough if the standards are only applied to people who already match what you think the standard is supposed to produce. He paused again. That's what I was doing. Not just yesterday. I was doing it before yesterday. Yesterday just made it... He stopped. Visible, she said. Visible. He held her gaze. I'm not asking for anything. I know what the report says. I'm not asking you to change anything in it. I just needed you to know that it landed. He paused. That it's going to mean something going forward, not just because of the review process, because it's true. She looked at him for a long moment, at the quality of what was in front of her, not performance, not self-preservation in the costume of self-awareness, but the actual thing itself, the difficult, expensive work of a person genuinely revising. Your underwater mechanics program is the best I've evaluated, she said. The pacing, the technical scaffolding, the way you sequence difficulty, it's genuinely excellent. She paused. The trainees in this program who go on to operational assignment are going to be better underwater because of what you built here. That's real. That matters. She met his gaze. Both things are in the report. Both things are true. He nodded. Once. The nod of a person receiving something they didn't expect and are taking the time to receive properly. Good luck, Senior Chief, she said. She walked past him toward the exit. The main entrance of the facility opened onto a vehicle court, and the Virginia Beach morning was bright and salt-edged and loud with traffic from the base road. Dana pushed through the glass doors into the air and stopped for a moment, adjusting to the light after the facility's institutional blue-white. She had taken 4 steps toward the parking area when she heard footsteps behind her. Calder Hess. Moving with the slightly self-conscious speed of someone who has been watching for an opportunity and is not quite sure this is the right one, but is taking it anyway. She stopped, turned. He was in his duty uniform now, the morning's pool gear exchanged for the standard working dress of someone with a full duty day ahead. He stopped when she turned, 3 feet away, with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing a sentence and is uncertain whether to deliver it. You don't have to do anything with this, he said. I just want to say it. He paused. 05:45 this morning, that 40 minutes. What you worked on with me? Not just the kick, but the other things. The things about why you teach. He stopped. My brother's been telling me since I was 12 that this was what I was supposed to do. Become a SEAL. Carry it forward. And I wanted it. But there was always a part of it that felt like it was his dream that I was borrowing. He paused. This morning felt like mine. He held her gaze. I just wanted you to know that. She looked at him. 22 years old, standing in the Virginia Beach morning with the full weight of what he is going to become still ahead of him. The training, the qualification, the operational deployment, the things she has been through and that he has not yet reached. The full inventory of what this road asks for, offered in exchange for what it gives back. She thought about a name engraved on the back of a coin, about inheritance, what it looks like, how it arrives, the forms it takes. About a father who spent a career doing things he couldn't name and left behind, in the spaces between the things he couldn't say, a shape that fit the person his daughter became. Keep the extension long, she said. Every set, he said. She nodded. She walked toward the vehicle court. He stood in the doorway for a moment after she was gone, in the morning light, with the expression of someone who is at the beginning of something large and knows it and is not afraid. Then he turned and went back inside, back to the pool, back to the lanes, back to the work. She sat in her vehicle in the parking area for a moment before starting the engine. She pulled out the coin, turned it in her hands, the worn insignia on the front, the name on the back, D. Reeves. Her father had carried it through 1997. Thomas Garrett had carried it through some number of years after. Donnelly had carried it for 17. The coin had moved through hands that had done significant things in locations that did not appear on accessible records, and it had arrived, after all of that, in a parking lot in Virginia Beach on a bright Tuesday morning, held by the person whose name was on it. She thought about what that meant, about the ways things find their way to where they belong. She thought about an archive request that would take 30 to 45 days and would tell her something about 1997 that she did not yet know. She thought about an 80-hour window and a package at Address Alpha and the thing that would come after. She put the coin in her jacket pocket. She started the engine. The vehicle court sat still around her, the facility at her back, the base road ahead, the Virginia Beach morning going about its ordinary business in the way that mornings always do, indifferent to what the people in it have just been through. A gull cut across the sky above the tree line. A supply vehicle moved slowly toward the far end of the lot. The facility's outer flag rippled once in a light sea wind and settled. She pulled out of the lot. In the facility behind her, Calder Hess was in lane 4 running kick extension drills. Rita Colson was running the pre-evolution equipment check with the particular thoroughness of someone who has recently been reminded what thoroughness is for. Guerrero was updating his mechanics curriculum with 3 changes he had identified during yesterday's observation period. Changes that were, he would later tell Colson, things he had known needed adjustment for about 8 months and had been putting off for no defensible reason. Hollister was in his office writing the first draft of a training framework revision he had been technically authorized to implement for 2 years, and was implementing now. Vance was on the phone with NSW Command, finalizing the briefing logistics and asking, for the second time, a question he had not finished asking during the first conversation, whether this was standard practice, sending someone like Mako into a facility like this to do what she had done. And if so, how long it had been standard practice, and whether he ought to be more troubled or less troubled by the answer. Donnelly was standing at the edge of the pool in the empty facility, looking at the water and the off-hours light. He was not troubled. He had been carrying something for 17 years that was not his to carry, and he had given it to the right person, and the right person had walked out of the building with it in her pocket, and whatever came next, the archive request, the 80-hour window, the thing at Address Alpha, the 30 years she likely had ahead of her in operations that would not appear on accessible records. All of that was where it belonged. The pool filters ran, the water held still. Real warriors don't announce themselves, he thought. They show up where they're needed, do what the moment requires, and leave the room change without making it about the changing. He picked up his bag. He walked out. The facility held its quiet. The low hum of the filters, the maintenance lights on the water, the timing board against the north wall, the facility record plaque showing 1 minute 47 seconds. A morning's work, a morning's truth. Still, after the leaving present in the room, in the new number on the plaque, in the conversations that had been had, in the small revisions taking place in the offices and lanes, and minds of every person who had been in this building since 0800. That doesn't go away when she does. Colson had said that. She was right.